Hey guys, good day. My name's Brother Jeff. Thank you for joining us again for this time of devotion together as we go into God's Word, discover who He is and what He's doing and how He wants us to follow after Him on a daily basis. We've been talking about the last few times together about discovering God's will for our lives. And initially we talked about how there's God's sovereign will, there's His moral will, and then there's His individual will for our lives. And then last week we kind of talked, basically it just got a good foundation, discussed the fact of what God's sovereign will is all about. And we found out that if we don't really have an understanding and have a great trust and confidence in the sovereignty of God and what He's doing around us that we can't see, it'd be very difficult for us to really discover our own will in the midst of all that, because our eyes are focused upon our comfort and our convenience. And today I want us to kind of just broaden again that conversation, discussing discovering God's will as we discover it in worship. Now, when we use that word, in at least the Christian church background that I grew up in, and hearing the conversations of people that I listened to, you would hear people associate that word worship with basically more than anything else the song part of the service. I'd hear people say sometimes over and over again, the worship was awesome today, and the pastor brought a great sermon, as if they were two separate things. And yet, those two things even together don't even come close to what worship is all about. And I want us to kind of just think about this today, that unless we discover what true worship is on a daily basis in every circumstance that we live, we will not discover God's will for our life. We won't find that contentment and that peace, and we won't find God working through our lives to reveal His glory in the midst of our church and within our individual lives as we live out our faith in our communities and our neighborhoods. There was a story, at least not really a story, but just an encounter that Jesus had with a Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. And Jesus has been left behind by the disciples. They've gone off to get some food. A woman comes at midday because she has a reputation, and she didn't want to be around the other women, so she came at that time of day. And Jesus talks about the living water He wanted to give to her. And then when she says, well, I want this water, He says, well, then bring me your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. He said, you truly have said the truth here, because you've had 5. And basically she had a reputation of having a relationship with men that weren't her husband. And Jesus was offering her salvation at this point. And she turns the whole topic, the whole conversation from what her life was about to about worship. And so she had some kind of knowledge of what worship was in her own mind. And she looks at Jesus, she says, well, we worship in this mountain, and you Jews, you worship in Jerusalem. And so she associated worship with a place, an event that happened in a time and place. And Jesus says, listen, woman, let me tell you today that neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will men worship anymore. He tells her, he says, listen, my Father is seeking those who worship Him in spirit and in truth. Now, we could spend a great deal of time here, because this devotion is only a few minutes we have together. Let's just say that this whole issue of spirit and truth, worshiping Him in spirit and truth, is in every moment, every circumstance, situation. It's a relationship with the one who lives within us, the Spirit of God, and the truth, who Jesus Christ is. It's an ongoing relationship. As I was thinking about this and how I wanted to share this topic with you and help you understand that discovering true worship, the intimacy of worship with God, will actually reveal God's will for your life on an everyday basis. And as I was thinking about this, I thought about 2 words. And both these words are 3-letter words. Both of them have the same letters in those words, but each one of them, depending on how you worship, will lead you in totally different directions. The first one is the word how, H-O-W. And most people talk about worship, they describe how they worship. Where, how, the type of music, the type of church they have, the type of sanctuary that they worship in, chairs or pews or lights or whatever it may be. They speak about how they worship. Now, the only problem with that is that if we speak about how, if that's our focus upon what worship is, then it becomes about performance. Because now those expectations, again, when you have performance, you always have expectations. And so you're always expecting certain ways and certain things to be done in a certain time, and you limit yourself to worship as far as how it's being done. That's why you hear all the arguments about the type of music or the type of atmosphere inside of a sanctuary, or whether it's in a gym or whether it's in a big sanctuary. We have all these discussions about how we do worship. But it comes down to performance. And then with those performances come expectations, which means, because we're fleshly people, those expectations sometimes really fall short of what we all want. We never find satisfaction, and so therefore we can never find unity together in that process of doing our worship together. And when we start allowing performance and expectations to come about, that's when we open the door to hypocrisy. And with the hypocrisy, we start creating idols. We start creating a situation where we put emphasis upon, not on the who, W-H-O, that we worship, but how. And then we start putting a man, a pastor, or a worship leader as being the focus about how good they are, how well they do things. And we're missing the whole purpose of worship. And so I want us to look at this today. We want to think about this whole situation. Are you doing worship by how you do worship? Is that the emphasis you put? Or actually, are you looking at who you're actually worshiping? Now, I know that's the Christian answer. It's about who we're worshiping. But is that who we're doing it with? Are we actually focusing upon that God of all creation, the God who sent his only son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for us, to save us and to give us his sacrifice through his blood, that we might worship him and be reconciled back into that relationship with him so we can worship with him? As I think about the whole issue of worship, I want us to think about temptation, because I believe that every temptation we encounter on a daily basis is always drawing us away from true worship. It's always allowing us to put something else in place of who God is and what he's doing around us. If you think about the temptation of Jesus when he went into the wilderness those 40 days and Satan was tempting him, we find here in Matthew chapter 4, verse 8 and 10, it says, "Again the devil took him to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All these things I will give to you,' he says, 'if you fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said, 'Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" Do you see the context that Jesus put here? He talked about worship and worshiping God only, but also that included serving him. And so we see that worship is always, that temptation is always there to drawing us away from worshiping who God is, and not how we worship, but worshiping who God is and serving him in every situation of our life. So we see every temptation draws us away from that. When our reverence for God in our worship comes to a place where we're always looking for what God can do for us instead of who God is, we've lost the essence of what worship is all about. And listen, think about this for a second before you get off track and you turn me off. If God doesn't answer your prayers and give you what you think you need, or fix the problem like you want to, do you still worship him? That's the question. Do you still worship him? Because see, if all we're doing is coming to try to get something from God, then we're not really worshiping him as God, as he should be. And so our reverence becomes like a ritual, a rote, like Isaiah talked about. So in our worship, we discover who God is. Let me read something now out of Luke chapter 9, verse 23 through 24. And he said, "And he was saying to them all, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it." I believe that is a call to worship, to take up our cross and follow him and serve him. It's losing our life and not making worship about us, but making worship about him. And so I hope and pray that as you begin to think about and search and seek out what God's worship is for you, that you understand that it's an everyday thing, it's an every moment thing. It's taking up your cross and following him wherever that may lead and whatever that may cost. Worship is not about what God can do for you. Worship is about who God is. And in discovering that and making him the focal point, you will discover God's will for your life. God bless.